worse because now everybody has a second language, Greek, that they can read. The original Hebrew copies, don't know what happened to them. They might be out there in a cave somewhere, just like the Dead Sea Scrolls. We'll talk about those in a little bit. But eventually the Hebrew copies was converted into Greek, and the oldest Old Testament writings we have is in Greek in what we call the Septuagint, which they symbolize by LXX, which is 70 in Roman numerals, because they believe that 70 people translate it over into Greek. So we have this version of the Old Testament come about 200 to 300 years before Jesus. And about 200 to 300 years after Jesus, we have a Hebrew text that comes up called the Masoretic text, or MT, and our Christian Bible is a translation of the Masoretic text because it's in the original Hebrew. This causes some problems. I have an example on the screen here. Genesis 46:27. In the Septuagint, in the Masoretic text, it says 70 people entered into Egypt. But then we fast forward to Acts chapter 7, Stephen's defense, and he says 75 people entered into Egypt with Jacob when Joseph was there. Why the difference? Well, it's because the apostles of the first century was using the Greek version, and the Greek version lists a little bit more stuff than the Hebrew text does. It lists 75 because within that list, the 5 extra people is 5 grandkids that's already born. So both of it's true. Yes, 70 people did go into Egypt, as the Hebrew says, and they list the 70 people. But the Greeks also right too, because they list the additional grandchildren that went with also, where the other one just leaves the grandchildren out. So that's why we got that slight difference. And a lot of these problems that people think are contradictions is actually because they don't understand that they were using the Greek version that's slightly different. Just a quick note, there is a third version called the Samaritan Pentateuch, or the Samaritan Bible. Penta means 5. You might hear the term Pentateuch used for the Torah. They're interchangeably. It just means the first 5 books. For the Samaritans, you know the Samaritans, the Good Samaritan from the parable, or the lady at the well who was a Samaritan, they only believed that the first 5 books was the Bible to them. That's what they used. Okay, can we trust this stuff? Yes, we can. And here's one reason why. These copies were very diligent at writing these down. If you guys ever played the telephone game in school, somebody has a message, they whisper to the next person, and then at the end, you get a total different message most of the time. That's nothing like what happened here. These guys would come in, have 2 copies, detailed, write them down with somebody looking over their shoulder, making sure they didn't make a mistake. They considered it so holy that every time they came into the word God or Yahweh, they had to go and take a bath, ritual bath, and come back and write it because they considered the word so holy. If the verse has God's name in it 5 times, they had to take 5 baths. So it took a long time to write this stuff down. And then it was given to the community of the scribes, and everybody read it out loud and checked with all the other versions to make sure it was exactly the same. Any version that had a mistake, they burned immediately. They made sure that they were copying Scripture exactly how they get it. Now, once in a while, even with all that, a few errors does slip by, but as we found out, it's mostly grammar errors, what we're talking about. We can trust our Old Testament because we have tons of copies to compare it to. And if you listen to my sermon last week, we only have 2 to 4 copies of Alexander's history, Well, we got a total of 42,300 copies of the Old Testament throughout the ages that we can go and compare and look at the differences between the types and determine what the original said. And something we call textual criticism, which is a whole field of biblical scholarship. Very interesting field. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the New Testament, which I gotta hurry up and get to. Canonization. Who puts their stamp down? Hey, these are the books that's going to be in the Bible. Well, we had a great assembly. You can read about in Nehemiah. It was in Ezra's time, and in Ezra's time, you have the last prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, and they all got together and formed what we know as the biblical canon of the Old Testament today, under the inspiration of God, and that form probably took shape and held for quite a while, but we have something called the Council of Jamina, I think that's how you say it. 200 years, 2nd century, 140 years after Jesus, where they were still debating the official canon of the Old Testament. By that time, the debate came down to whether or not to include Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes. The other two books was Chronicles and Esther was being debated before that. Esther is a very unique book. Do you know that God's name, or even the word God, is not mentioned once throughout the entire book? Yeah. Esther.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But pretty much by the 2nd century, firmly we had the Old Testament we have today. Although there were some other very influential books at the time, and I think I have it down here. No, I'm hopping into the New Testament. In the New Testament, we'll talk about Catholics, how they have a couple other Old Testament books in their Bible, but even the Jews didn't consider those books as canonical. So we'll look at that. All right. Take a break here.
How do they determine that they weren't powerful? Like, I mean, when you even mentioned that with Esther, how do they determine that that wouldn't be worthy to be in there?
They had a process, and I'm going to go through the process in the New Testament. We had a much better, how should I say this, standards, I guess. They went off of what I showed you in the Torah, for what constituted as a prophet. So, the prophet section was very easily, mainly they had a running theme of the work had to focus on a theological concept, something to do with the Lord, to make it into Scripture. So you got books like, in the Catholic tradition, you have 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which are great books for history. It tells of the Maccabean revolt, and it talks about what happened during those, what we call the 400 years of silence between the Old and New Testament. But it's just historical account of what happened. There's no real mention of God there. There's no real mention of anything that will grow your faith. So that was something that they decided, no, not too much. Now, the Jews celebrated certain feasts and holidays. I think it's called Purim. And where did that come from? Well, that originated from Esther. So that's why Esther got put into the canon, even though she doesn't mention God. But it does mention a lot of theological stuff, like her faithfulness to it, how the miraculous way of how the Jews were saved, and what ultimately became a feast, one of the feasts in the Jewish calendar. So they did have a process of weaving this book as in the Bible and this book as out of the Bible, based on a theological theme concept, and with the standards of the Torah. But there was also a big debate about this as well, like we see with the Samaritans and with the Sadducees. They said, only the Torah and nothing else. And the Pharisees said, okay, only what we have now today in our Old Testament, but nothing else. And we're going to see, especially with the New Testament, like the Ethiopian church, they believe in a couple extra books in their canon as well. into it. The New Testament has much higher standards.
Well, yeah, but wasn't Esther mainly about the preservation of the Jewish race? They were gonna be wiped out otherwise.
Yeah. And that's why they celebrate Purim. It's a feast
So
of
that's,
honoring that
okay.
God
So
saved them.
that's tied in, of course,
Yeah.
as that came out of it, okay.
And then, of course, the concept of the promise to Abraham of their land, and they get the land, especially under David and Solomon. Now they own all of Israel, and then the exile, they get kicked off of it. Ezra and Nehemiah's book is huge in importance because it's a restoration of those covenant terms. They get their land back. They become a country again. The temple's restored. Our worship's focused on the Lord again.
Right.
So that's why some of those books come in. Then with Chronicles, you see the same thing. Chronicles, even though it's more of a historical account, it has a big emphasis on the priests and how the religion transformed in a way during the Second Temple period. So again, the theological theme versus non-theological theme was pretty much their standard.
Well, when I was taught in school many years ago, I was taught that the reason why the different books, like Catholics have the Apocrypha, they use it in their Bible as opposed to what we do, is because we believe they weren't God inspired.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying, theological theme.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
If God didn't inspire them, we don't need them. It's man's account of history.
and that's why I brought up the thing with the Torah, because he says only if it is inspired, then here is your litmus test.
Yeah.
Here's how you check if it is or not.
So like with the Maccabees, then that really would be considered not God inspired?
No, because it doesn't really have a focus on God. It goes in
I mean, I've
many
never
directions
read it, so
if you read
about
it.
it.
Have you read part of Herodotus' histories?
Do it again?
Or how about the Iliad and the Odyssey? Have you read those?
Yeah,
Maccabees reads more like that.
okay.
Historical.
Yeah. Historical, mainly historical with some mythological elements in it. Like Maccabees has, no, maybe it's Tobit has a demon coming and interacting with humans, and there was a deal made there and stuff like that. Stuff like that was thrown out immediately out of the Old Testament canon for the Jews. And then you got some real crazy stuff like there's a book, I think it's Wisdom of Solomon, and in the book it says that Solomon enslaved demons to help build the temple. And people obviously read that at the time and said, no, that sounds more made up than as something that God would give us. So that got rejected out of the canon. There's actually quite a few books that got rejected. Good 40, 50 of them. And you can tell because the genre and the writing and stuff is just totally different than what we read in the Old Testament. But when I go over New Testament standards here in just a second, I think it will become a little bit more clear. Quick examples. I see I'm running out of time quickly. Most people think that Jesus died in either 30 or 33 AD. And the closest copies we have to it, this is the John Ryland preface of John chapter 18. Dates to AD 130, found in Egypt. So this is the oldest piece of the New Testament we have. And as I go along here, I'll show you we have very close copies, very close to the date. And of course the originals, like I said in my sermon last week, is dated even closer within the life, within 40 years after Jesus' death. And even one passage, like I said, dated within the crucifixion year. The Bomer Papyrus, right here, is 22 different scrolls, and it covers a good amount of the New Testament, AD 150. I don't know how you say this. Diatessaurion is AD 170, and it's important because by this date we already know we have all four Gospels, and what this guy did was took all four and put them into one book, one binding, what we call today a codice. The Chester Beatty Papyri It's pretty important. It has 11 manuscripts, huge manuscripts. The rolls of them is like 39 feet, and it has most of the Old Testament and New Testament books dated around AD 200. Let me back up for just a second. I didn't put it in here, but I wanted to mention it. Remember how we said that the original Hebrew Bible was 200 years after Christ? Well, we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they date to 200 years before Christ. And they are written in Hebrew, and they have the complete Old Testament there. So we actually got the complete Old Testament 400 years even pushed back beyond that. And they compared the two, and the writing is practically the same. So for that 400-year span, they kept, like I said, the procedure going. And now the Dead Sea Scrolls is currently the oldest version of the Old Testament that we have. It even predates the Greek version. Right here is a letter from Paul, a copy from 2 Corinthians. It dates to AD 175, so it's pretty cool. So we got most of the Gospels, and we got some Paul's writings, and so those are just some examples. The four great unicals, okay, or what we call codexes. Codex Vaticanus, AD 325. It's called that because it's held at the Vatican. And these four, as you can see the dates there, are complete New Testaments. They are the first complete New Testaments. And most of your New Testament Bible is translated off of one of these four. So this is the text that really helped give you what you have today. Okay, Eusebius, I like saying that, Eusebius, was a scholar, a church worker during the 3rd century, and he was the church historian. He wrote classical history, or in English, history of the church, and outlined a lot of stuff for us, quoted a lot of stuff for us, told us how stuff came to be and whatnot, so we get a lot of good stuff from his book. And he says that when people met to form the New Testament, they had 3 main criteria for what would become part of the canon. And this is extremely important. First off, well, I'm going to skip around here, but first off is apostolic authority. It had to be written basically by an eyewitness. It had to be written by an apostle. We have got some great writings by Clement of Rome. He was a student of the Apostle Peter, but his works was after the cut-off. Since he wasn't an eyewitness to Jesus, we said we're not going to accept it. We are only going to accept people who actually witnessed Jesus. And that's what we have. We have the Gospels, the eyewitness accounts there. We got Paul, who has seen him, James and Peter and Jude seeing Jesus. So they said only eyewitness testimony. Number 2, theological consistency, and this is very important. They all had to say the same message. Okay? Like Paul says in 1 Corinthians, I preach you the gospel which I have received from the apostles. All of our message is the same. If you don't believe me, head back to Jerusalem and ask them. They're going to tell you the same thing. And if you read it throughout the New Testament, the theme and the doctrine is the same. And I did a comparison for one of my other classes between Paul and Peter, because they thought that Paul's Christianity was very different than the apostles. And I got like 18 pages of comparisons. Their doctrine lines up great. So that's number 2. And number 3, use in the church. Use in the church. What became the most popular stuff that was told over and over again during the 1st century was the 3rd standard. If you had something that was liked very much by one church but not read in the rest of them, well, that might be a fake account because only you guys believe it, but these guys don't. So we're going to say that's an outliner and just push that to the side. So on these 3 criteria is basically how they formed the canon of the New Testament. Here we have the first canons coming into date. You can see the 4 codexes over on this side. A guy named Marcirian made the first canon suggestion. And as you can see, they were debating a few of these later works like Timothy and Titus and Hebrews and James. The second column here, I think on the next slide, around 170 AD, this guy, Singerane, Muratorian, he has most of the New Testament that we have today that he suggested. And by, let's get that, by time of the 3rd century, they finalized it. I'll get to that in just a second. I want to make a brief mention here. These are early church fathers. Have you guys ever heard of any of these people?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of you guys?
Ignatius and
Uh,
Lyman.
Clement of Rome
Probably.
was the disciple of Peter. The big 3 is Clement, Ignatius, and Polycarp. We have all their letters, and they were all disciples of an apostle. Like I have up there, Ignatius and Polycarp learned the tradition directly under John, and they became major church leaders as well. We can take their letters. If the entire New Testament got burned, we could take quotes from just their letters and re-establish almost a majority of the New Testament. And since they are late 1st century, early 2nd century, it's proof that all the works within our New Testament comes from the 1st century, which again verifies that it was during the time of the apostles and that they were eyewitnesses. Clement became the 2nd bishop of Rome, what the Catholics called the 2nd pope. But I don't believe they used that term then. I don't think the Catholic tradition started until about the 3rd century. Linus became the 1st pope, or the 1st bishop of Rome. Papias, we got these guys' writings preserved as well. They talk a lot about quoting from the New Testament. And as you can see there, 3 of them is mentioned by name in the New Testament. So they were contemporaries of mainly Paul. And Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna, which is mentioned in Revelations. The angel there, the bishop there, he will have been the guy serving in that position at the time, although he's not mentioned by name. But all these guys have some good stuff, and I encourage you to read them to kind of get an idea of what the 1st century was like. There was other gospels written, but was rejected from the canon. Here is a huge list of them. I got another list too. These are what we call, though, the Gnostic Gospels. Remember, the theme had to be the same. Well, when we read, especially 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, he's preaching against Gnosticism that came up early 2nd century, late 1st century, when John wrote. And all these Gospels has the Gnostic theme and a late date, so they were rejected as non-eyewitnesses. The Apocrypha also has a late date, and they do not meet the historical standards that the New Testament meets as well. So we can trust what we have. We have books here like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Peter, the MC Gospel of James, stuff like that, that was rejected. That was very late 2nd, 3rd, or early 3rd century. We know that they're forgeries. And you read them and you just find crazy stuff. The Apocalypse of Peter, we only have part of it. I've read it. It's only 7 pages. Peter talks about the empty tomb and the angels coming out and their heads stretch all the way up into the heavens. So you got these 2-mile-high angels, and then you got you got stuff that you would read in Revelations happened during that time. And obviously, if that happened when Jesus rose from the dead, I'm sure somebody in Jerusalem wrote about it somewhere else. So these were all rejected as well. We call them apocryphal because it means we doubt the authorship or the authenticity. That's a word you should know. The Council of Carthage in 397 was basically the people who got together. They were trying to copy Acts 15 when the apostles got together to decide on doctrine. You know, the debate there in Acts was, should the Gentiles get circumcised? And God put together these men to decide, no, all they need is to hear about and believe in Jesus. So they got together and pretty much put the stamp of approval on what we have as the New Testament today. 37 books, right? So, here's a few charts I want to go over quickly. Just a few examples. Homer's Iliad. The closest writing we have to it is 400 years later, but they still say Homer wrote it. Like I said last week, the New Testament was written within 20 years of Jesus' death. So first off, ours is more reliable time-wise, and they got a lot of examples here, but I'm running out of time. So they got about 1,900 copies of Homer's Iliad, and if you add up all these other works, Plato's works, Sophocles' plays, Caesar's Galactic Wars, stuff like that, for all these works, total is about 4,000 copies. Do I have it here? No, I don't. For the New Testament itself, and that's only one work, we have over 5,300 copies from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century. So we can be for sure that we know what we have here. To visualize this, if you take all those classical writers and put all their works together, it will only amount to about 4 feet worth. The One World Trade Center is 1,792 feet. If you take all the copies of the New Testament, it's a mile high. If you take a copy of the New Testament plus the Old Testament copies, it's 2.5 miles high. That's how much evidence we have for it. It's the most well-documented book in history. We already talked about the scribal process. And if you take the other centuries into account, the chain of custody up to today, to make sure that everything's written correctly and whatnot, we've got over 66,000 copies of the New Testament, so we can definitely trust it. This is what I was talking about earlier. The Catholics here include Tobit, Judith, 1st, 2nd Maccabees, stuff like this. You can go on Wikipedia and see this. Some of the others, like the Ethiopians, have some other weird books. To mention is the Book of Enoch. That was a very popular book during Jesus' day. Actually, Jude quotes from it. Doesn't mean that the whole book is scripture. It's just the verse that he quotes becomes scripture with the point he's trying to make. So the Ethiopians, their canon, I'm trying to show that their canon is a little bit different than ours. All right, route to the Bible. I only got 1 minute left. I really wanted to go into the different versions, why we got so many different English translations, why is some verses missing from the Bible and stuff like that, but I'm out of time. So I will save that. I'll be in my classroom next week continuing this if anybody's interested on that topic. And then there's some stuff here, like half of chapter 8 of John, I was going to read from it, is missing in the new Bibles. And you might say, oh, that's not good. Well, textual criticism studies this stuff, and we found a lot of manuscripts of John, very, very close manuscripts, complete manuscripts of John, dating to the earliest manuscripts that we have that doesn't have that in there. And that's why they took it out. They said that John did not write that part. It was added into it. We actually have actual manuscripts that attaches that story at the end of Luke even. So they believe that it is a true story that was preserved orally, but they do not believe that it was originally part of John's account. So that's why that first story in chapter 8 was taken out of all modern Bibles. I'll go into more detail on that next week. So if you want to hit the camera, please. Thank you guys.